everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I've been looking forward to this conversation ever since you emailed me and brought it up. So I'm very excited to learn more about getting elected is the easy part. I would assume getting elected would be the hard part, so I'm very interested to learn more. Before we go ahead and get started, I would like to acknowledge that we gather on the traditional lands of the first people of Seattle, the Duwamish people, past and present. Let's take a moment tonight to honor with gratitude the land itself and the Duwamish tribe, a people who are still here, continuing to bring their ancient heritage to light. It is an honor to be joined tonight by two women of accomplishment and distinction, whose determination, service, and insight have left a lasting mark on policies and lives in King County and Washington State. Senator Karen Keiser represents Washington's 33rd Legislative District, which contains a number of suburban cities south of Seattle, including SeaTac, Kent, Des Moines, and Burien. As President pro tempore, she presides over the Washington State Senate when the Lieutenant Governor is unavailable, and as Chair of the Senate Labor and Commerce Committee, she champions policies that help working families and improve women's economic security. As the former chair and a longtime member of the Senate Health and Long-Term Care Committee, Senator Keiser was a pivotal leader in reforming Washington's healthcare system, fully implementing the Affordable Care Act, and passing Washington's nation-leading paid family and medical leave program. She's also served as the lead Democratic negotiator on the capital budget. Senator Keiser currently serves on the Budget Writing Ways and Means Committee and as vice chair of the Rules Committee. She has served in both the House and the Senate of the Washington State Legislature since 1995. When she is not running or serving in the legislature, she enjoys singing, dancing, gardening, and now writing, because getting elected is the easy part is her first book. Councilmember Jean Cole-Wells represents District 4 on the King County Council, which encompasses a large part of the city of Seattle. Councilmember Cole-Wells took office on January 1st, 2016, and was reelected to a second term in 2019. She chairs the King County Council's Committee of the Whole and is the vice chair of both the Council and the Employment and Administration Committee. She also serves on the Budget and Fiscal Management Committee, Government Accountability and Oversight Committee, King County Board of Health, and the Transportation and Economy Environment Committee. She represented the state of Washington on the Western Interstate Commission for Higher Education for 11 years, serving as chair in 2016. She also served for several years on the executive committee of the National Conference of State Legislatures, twice as president of the Women's Legislative Network. She's also a member of the University of Washington Women's Center Anti-Trafficking Task Force and has done a lot of other work against human trafficking, which is fabulous, including being part of the State Task Force Against Human Trafficking, which was created by her own Senate Bill 5884 in 2015. Without further ado, it is my honor to turn it over to our speakers this evening.
Thank you, Mara. That was very well done.
Yeah, very well done. It's hard to sit here and hear accolades.
That was weird. Just weird.
Thank you, Milo, for arranging this for tonight. And I was really excited when Karen asked me if I would take part in this. I missed Karen. I haven't seen her that much because I'm not in the Senate anymore, but it is such a privilege to serve with her and former Senator David Frott here with us as well. Tonight, I'm going to ask a few questions of Karen, and then we will have a few minutes of Karen reading. She'd like to read.
I'll read a couple excerpts if you want.
And either before that or after that, we'll just see how it goes. We'll have some questions from our audience as well. The plan is to end about 7, and then Karen will sign some books if anybody wishes to have that done. So, Karen, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. I think it's safe to say that many people, likely including some here tonight, have thought of writing a book, but you didn't. What prompted you to write this book? And what, if any, were some of the bumps you experienced along the way in writing it?
Well, I was in the midst of isolation during the pandemic and kind of bored to tears, to be honest. As a legislator, you're pretty busy, and all of a sudden you didn't have anything to do. And I was reading a book by former Senator George, I always want to say George C. That's not quite right. Scott from Seattle. He was a Republican senator, and he wrote a book called A Majority of One. And I started getting really interested in it, and it was a good book. It was quite authoritative and quite well done. And I was impressed. And I thought, well, I know some stuff too. And maybe I should start sharing what I know. And so I just started writing on my computer. And I thought maybe I was doing a blog or a newsletter or something. And I kept writing and writing and writing. And 22 chapters later, I had a book. And then I had to figure out how to do this, because I know how to write, but I don't know how to do the rest of it. Trying to get a book published was really daunting, scary.
So, any bumps along the way?
I think I was charmed, honestly, because I had time and space, and I had this wonderful colleague who was a member of the communications staff of the Senate Democratic Caucus. His name was Rick Manoogian. And Rick was a former staff from me years ago, and we were sort of simpatico about things. And he was willing to sort of be a sounding board back and forth, back and forth. And it was so helpful to have that, because I was all by myself.
Sure.
Yeah.
As we all remember those first 2 years of the pandemic,
Yeah.
when we were very isolated or
Right.
working remotely all
Right.
the time. Well, speaking of the book, getting elected is the easy part. That's a great title. How did you come by having this as your title?
Well, that actually was one of my chapter titles originally. And Rick told me, this whole book is pretty much what you have in that chapter in terms of what you're putting across or trying to explain. So he talked me into making it the title of the book. We fussed around other titles too, and it was kind of a complicated thing to come up with. So that one had a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek thing. So I thought that made sense.
Well, I think it's a great title. And I think a good title can go a long way to attract people to reading the book and purchasing it. Yes.
I hope so.
Good job. So your book blends being a practical guide, especially for new legislators, with your keen insights into what really goes on in the legislature. Some of what might be referred to as the behind-the-scenes scuttlebutt that could be of interest to a broader audience than solely to new legislators or people hoping to become legislators. What did you enjoy the most in writing the book? Any examples you would like to share?
Well, the one rule I made for myself was to not name names. So I wanted to be open and frank about what was going on. And the only way I could really do that without really betraying confidences or betraying really the work that we do is to have that rule. However, so I wrote a chapter called Behind Closed Doors. And you want me to, I could read
Yeah,
something from
actually,
that,
that's a good
because
idea.
I
just
think
as we
that
go
actually
along.
kind of clarifies what I tried to do when I shared personal observations and experiences, but didn't expose everybody. What's said in caucus is supposed to stay in caucus. Even cell phone photos from caucus are prohibited. Members are not supposed to be called out or identified as opposing or supporting a bill. Nevertheless, as former Senator George W. Scott once observed, the only secrets in the legislature are unspoken ones, because the outlines of a caucus discussion on big bills usually leak out, perhaps with a wink, a nod, and innuendo. The skilled lobbyists outside the doors of the chambers have their own sources, and they always seem to unearth the gist, if not the actual detail of the discussion. Then, too, a legislator might violate the confidentiality of the caucus and share information with others. I knew a member who would sit silently during caucus discussions and rarely express an opinion, but then the details of those cloistered discussions would be reported faithfully to the minority leader of the opposition caucus. That member's espionage shut down full and honest discussion in our caucus for several years, until he finally chose to caucus with the other party. He's no longer in the legislature, I will just mention that. But
And I know who you meant, and he was a distant cousin of mine.
I'm sorry to call you out. I didn't mean to call you out.
We're not, she ain't on it.
She's connected to everybody.
Okay, thank you for reading that, and I remember so vividly those times and all sorts of other times in the caucus. But I left the Senate at the end of 2015 to go on to the King County Council, and so 8 years ago, basically. How have things changed in the last 8 years?
It's been a real tidal wave, a culture change, which is amazing for a hidebound institution like a legislature. In the last 10 years, we've had a true infusion of younger, more diverse members, young women and people of color who never would have in 20 years ago even thought to run. But they've been encouraged to run. We've had some mentoring, some campaign schools, some consultants, volunteers, and they've succeeded in running. And that's one of the reasons I wrote the book, because they get to the legislature and they think they're going to change the world overnight. And it doesn't happen that way. Those are still a lot of bureaucratic hoops and hurdles to get through in a process of a legislature. And a lot of these wonderful, young, enthusiastic members get frustrated and disappointed and even angry. And some don't run for re-election, which is a total loss. So that's one of the reasons I wrote the book.
Okay. In your time as a legislator, you mentioned how things have changed, but looking back on it, and whether you put this in your book or not, but what have been some of the hardest lessons you have learned or had to learn?
Well, I think the hardest lesson is that you can't change the world overnight, that you have to have a strategy, you have to be persistent, you have to figure out pathways and work through that. And it's pretty complex, it's pretty daunting. Sometimes you're defeated, but at the same time, if you do just insist, persist, and don't give up, you can get some great stuff done. So it is hard. There's no doubt about it. It takes your life. It eats your life sometimes. I'm so blessed to have 3 grown children that survived from my legislative years. And I was very blessed also to be in the minority for several years. When I first joined the legislature, I was in the minority, and I got to listen and learn, and I didn't have much to do. So that was really helpful, especially when you have a family. And so those are things I learned along the way. Was it's easier to be in the minority, and when you're in the majority, seize what you have and don't let go.
I like that, don't let go, and I know from personal experience you never did.
No, I don't.
Can you give us some concrete examples from that?
Well, John Burbank just arrived, and John Burbank and I worked for 20 years on paid family and medical leave in one way or the other. And boy, it was a long road. We actually passed a bill in 2007, 8? Yeah, and then the Great Recession hit, and we had to totally dump that one and start over again. Then we went into the minority and thought, oh gosh, never going to happen, but kept going, kept getting it. Finally got it done in 2017, and it was done in a, well, to be frank, John's organization did some polling, and the polling was so good for passage that we could take the poll results to the business community and show them, this is what's going to happen if we have to go to the ballot. Do you want to go to the table and figure out how to make this work? And they decided to go to the table. So we were able to negotiate an agreed to program that is now one of the most popular programs in the state.
It's amazing. It really is.
And one of the first in the country.
Yes, we were one of the first in the country because we had to build a completely new program. The one couple of states that had a program had already had a disability insurance program for public use, and we didn't have that, so we had to start from scratch. And the integrity of the unemployment insurance trust fund was a big technical problem, and we got it fixed and protected, and it's worked.
Great, good example. And I should say with John too, he and I worked early on in my time in the Senate on accessing quality childcare,
That's
which
right.
was so critical and made a
So
lot
much.
of gains. But here we are now, still struggling
Yeah.
with that big time. What are some examples, Karen, that you included in the book, or maybe did not include in the book, that you think would most surprise people, whether they're readers or not?
Okay, I'm going to read from the Me Too chapter.
Okay.
So I have a chapter called Me Too because it's Me Too. If I can find it. It's here somewhere. What chapter is it? I'm going to have to look at my own. There we go. It is on page 63. Okay. Chapter 11. I start each chapter with a quote from somebody that seemed to be germane. This one is a quote. I cautiously went up to speak to the very powerful Speaker of the Missouri House of Representatives, and I explained to him the bill and asked, did he have any advice? And he looked at me, and he paused, and he said, well, did you bring your knee pads? That was U.S. Senator Claire Haskell. And it was just over a decade that a very angry Democratic male state senator threw a temper tantrum, and he called me names, the C word and the B word, on the floor of the Senate because I would not give him what he wanted. And it was only about 5 years ago that a male state senator in Washington had to resign his seat in response to pretty well documented rumors of inappropriate behavior. In 2018, allegations of sexual harassment surfaced in state legislatures in Minnesota, Kentucky, Illinois, Rhode Island, and Oregon. Some 200 women in Sacramento signed a letter protesting a pervasive environment of sexual wrongdoing in the California State House. Silence is the enemy of justice. Jeffrey Epstein, Bill Cosby, Harvey Weinstein, Bill O'Reilly, R. Kelly, high-profile celebrities who were able to use sexual harassment and assault for years without repercussions. No one believed the women who spoke out until the Me Too movement broke the silence. And it's still an issue, and we still have to speak out. You can't pretend that it doesn't happen.
I know there was some media coverage several months ago about one of these female state legislators who was being stalked and had to take out a protection order against a lobbyist.
Right. Yeah, and just last year, an Idaho legislator was actually arrested, I believe, for assaulting a staffer. So it happens, and nobody really documents it overall, but it does happen still.
I remember a few years ago before I left, I found out that one of the lobbyists in the library, Pritchard, what is it?
Yeah,
Pritchard.
Mhm.
Was in the corner and had a voodoo doll
Oh, yes.
in my likeness and was throwing darts at it.
I heard
Horrible.
that. Yes, I heard that.
I'm sure that not only women, but legislators,
Yeah.
both women and men, trans, have stories.
Yeah.
It's a tough place in Olympia. And especially given a lot of us would be there and, staying there during the legislative session.
Right.
So lots of stories could be told about that. Another question. Your chapter 15 is about money, and how many potentially great women candidates for public office look at the idea of asking for money and just can't handle it. that at all. But it is an absolute necessity. And they have to get money to be able to get their name out, their positions out, and so forth, and to be competitive. You end the chapter with this: money isn't everything. That was the last sentence in the chapter. But it can be obviously very important. How does this really work? How does this work for women more than men?
It's so hard. And any of it, both of us, in full disclosure, are on the board of a PAC called Win with Women. And we have been working, we have a 10-year anniversary next year.
Next week.
Next week.
Next week we have an event. I was going to ask you about that.
Yeah. So, and one of the reasons Win with Women got started is because when women are asked to run or think they could run, they often cringe at the idea of asking their friends and family, which is your first circle of actual asking for donations to a campaign. And they don't want to do that. They don't mind doing everything else, but asking for money was just not something they could get comfortable with. And you ask them again 6 months later, and 6 months later. Usually it takes 6 or 7 times before most women decide that yes, they can do it. And it takes a lot of support. You need to have a good list for them, sit with them, and give them a script and walk them through it. I find it's really good to be schizophrenic about it. To just leave, two people. That's my candidate person as opposed to my real person. And I just find that if I can separate those two things, I can ask for money with a straight face.
Larry Phillips is outside trying to get in.
Oh.
Do we want to let
You
him
want to let him in?
Yeah.
He is a former legislator and former council member, and I succeeded him.
Right.
Okay,
So,
go ahead.
okay.
Yeah.
So I do have a chapter. It's chapter, I can't read anything. It's just chapter 15. And I want to say, not only do you have to raise money, but then you have to live on a legislative salary, unless, of course, you're independently wealthy or have a spouse to support you or some other means. And this is a quote from one of our newer members, Liz Lovelet, who is from the Whatcom County area. And thanks for coming, Larry. Liz Lovelet said this: living on the salary of a citizen legislator is nearly impossible for most. Noted first-time Senator Liz Lovelet. Stagnation in compensation makes the job untenable for people raising families and has made it largely a position for wealthy people, retirees, or those with a working spouse. The vast majority of state legislatures are part-time institutions that pay part-time salaries. Only 10 states boast full-time legislatures. The roots go back centuries. State legislatures accommodated farmers, and they convened during the months when plowing and planting weren't necessary priorities. Other lawmakers who could afford to work part-time included retirees, people who had family wealth or pensions, public employees who could take unpaid leave, thriving professionals, and self-employed businessmen. Regardless of the reasons, in the end, this narrow demographic of office holders accounts for much of the conservative tilt of state legislatures, because it's really hard for what you call working people, union members, for example, or young mothers who have childcare issues and need support for family reasons, to give up whatever they do for their livelihood and go take a part-time job, move to Olympia, and be a part-time legislature. The legislature only meets for 60 days one year and 105 days the other year in the biennial sessions. But you have interim work, committee work, and so forth that you have to do as well, in the majority especially. So it can take up to 70% of your life. It's really hard to have a part-time job that pays decent wages when you're working for a part-time legislative job that takes 70% of your time. So that's just a reality, and we don't really have a solution for that. I've been trying to think about it, and I haven't come up with a solution, but let's come up with one someday. Yeah.
Those 10 states that have full-time, is that worth it?
Well, I don't know. I think it's politically dangerous in a way. It's not popular. And part of me says the citizen part of being a citizen legislature is very valuable because you do go back to your district. You do have, people talk to you in the frozen food aisle or over the produce. You run across people all the time who engage. So it's important to have that interaction back home. That's good. But it's not good that it restricts the demographics of who can serve.
And I think it's demoralizing too. When you work so hard, such important public policy issues. And it's demoralizing. When I left in the end of 2015, I think we had earned $41,000 a year for 7 years. We didn't have a raise because,
Right.
understandably, a lot of people did not.
No,
because
we
of
had
the
a
Great
lot of
Recession.
issues with that.
But Karen, one other thing on this, the Center for American Women in Politics at Rutgers University has done a lot of research on women in the legislature and statewide office and Congress and so forth. But just what you said about it takes a woman about 7 times to have people suggest that they run, where a man, and this is generalizing, of course,
It's true.
but on average for a man, it can take 5 minutes. Oh, yeah,
I
run for the legislature, why not? Sure.
It's so true. I do have some detail on the legislative salaries because Washington State isn't the worst. I think maybe the worst, maybe it's New Mexico, but a legislator in Maine earns $14,000 in the first year of the biennium and $9,982 in the second year. But Oregon pays $31,000 per year, and we are up past $50,000 now. So it's not as bad as it used to be. When I started, it was below 30.
Yeah, I think it was, Larry, when you left, it was
Yeah.
around 21,000.
Yes, it
Yeah,
was
in the 20s, yeah.
it was hard.
Yeah. So anyway, that's just a hard reality. I also think some members work out I don't know if I'd call it a sweetheart deal, but a deal to have a part-time job at another organization, sometimes one that has an interest.
Definitely. Or they work full-time year-round, and then during the legislative session, they're excused, they don't get that money
Right.
for that one period
On
of
unpaid
time.
leave, I'll go on unpaid leave.
I was just talking with somebody whose father was a legislator in Texas, and I said, gosh, as I remember, in Texas, I think they meet every other year.
That's right.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and their pay is extremely low, but then when they retire, their retirement benefits are the same as either the Supreme Court justices
Oh my
or the
goodness, really?
Superior
Wow.
Court justices.
So
So that's hugely more than their salary.
That's interesting. Yeah, every state is different.
So Karen, you mentioned Win with Women, and 10 years ago, Karen approached me on the Senate floor. I was in the Senate then. I remember it so distinctly, and she said, Jeannie, would you be interested in joining me in, starting a new organization? And I don't remember if you had the name then,
I don't know.
but we did have it named Win with Women. I think Elaine Rose and
Mhm.
Karen Cooper
Mhm.
were the other two. So we are having our 10-year anniversary at an event in Belltown next Wednesday night at the same place, the Bay Vista, in the Beaumont room. J.A. Jance lived in the building, and if you've read her mysteries, her hero in this series in Seattle was called
Detective Beaumont.
Yeah, whatever the initials.
JP Beaumont.
JP Bowman,
that's
that's right. So we've had a lot of events there, so we're having that. I'm not bringing that up to get you to go. If you want to go, talk to me afterwards, but that's not why I brought it up. But Win with Women took a lot of effort to get it off the ground, and we've been doing pretty well over the years in helping progressive women get it elected to the legislature. But, without just singing our praises, but how has that helped? I mean, is that something that we don't hear as much about electing men to the legislature with an organization specific to that?
When we started this 10 years ago, we were down to just 6 women in the Senate Democratic Caucus. And that was in like 2013, 2012. It was a low point because we used to have
The highest in the country.
the highest in the country back after in the 1990s, there was a Year of the Women in 1992. Patty Murray got elected then, and a lot of women went into politics then. But then they decided, can you believe it, to retire after 15 years or so. So we had a big wave of legislators who had come in during that wave of the
41%.
and they retired, and they were all replaced by these wonderful young ambitious guys. Right? And so there we were, and we were down from, I believe we were at a high of 18 women in the Senate Democratic Caucus to 6. And I'll never forget, Jean Darnielle brought up in caucus, why don't we have, and I remember our leader telling us, look around, we don't have, but there's 6 of us. So anyway, that sort of spurred me on. We now have 16 women in the Senate Democratic Caucus, and it's a much more diverse group of women as well. I believe 6 of them are. Oh, hi, Anne. I'm so glad you made it.
I'm living in the past. I thought it was still in university.
I'm glad you're here. Anyway, as I said, we have 25% of our members are now people of color in the legislature, and many of them are women as well. And we've just really diversified our membership over the last 10 years. It's been stunning. And we have more voices and more points of view as well.
It's very exciting, but it's, it comes and goes. And as I was starting to say, we, in 1998 or so, we had the highest for a few years of all legislatures in the entire country. And our high point was 41 point something %. We were on the front page of the New York Times. It was pretty heady stuff. And I remember actually introducing legislation to create a women's caucus, and didn't get anywhere because people's reaction was, well, we don't need that here. Now we have, or women's commission.
Yeah. So currently, I think we have 46.3% of the legislature is made up of women now. But we're number 4 in the nation, not number 1. Because Nevada has a majority.
So there's been progress all around.
Progress is quite, not all around. No,
The
I
South has
in this, to be honest, in the deep red South, it's still difficult for women, very difficult. And you're looking at percentages in single digits in those chambers for the most part.
There's one, I don't know if it's Alabama, had no women for a while. So,
Yeah.
changing. Okay, let's go on. What do you anticipate whenever you retire will be your most cherished memories of having been in the legislature?
Oh, I don't know. There's so many. Honest to gosh, I don't remember. I mean, one of the jobs of writing this book was to sort of scrape your brain a little bit and go back and find those memories that you had tucked away and pull them out and look at them. And that was fun. And I enjoyed reminding myself of a lot of good and bad times. But I don't think I have a shining moment.
Okay.
Although there's a wonderful picture of me and Representative Mike Sells from the House. And we're standing on the wings of the House while they're voting on the paid family and medical leave bill. And that's a really lovely picture. That was nice.
Well, you can include this in your second book.
Actually, I am thinking about a second.
I'm sure. I'm going to ask one more question, then we want to hear from you all, any questions that you might have, and Karen do a little more reading as well. In your epilogue, you address racism and past and current moments for social justice and current movements for social justice, and some of your experiences and observations over the years, and how now, quote, indeed, we have been pushed backward on many issues. Of course, there's the matter of the Supreme Court. Any thoughts you'd like to share about that, and maybe in reference to the upcoming legislative session and what you'll be working on?
I think what's going on right now at the national level with Congress and the dysfunction of Congress makes our state legislatures even more important, because they're unable to pass real policy. They can pass budgets, usually an omnibus budget by the end of the year. So it's really up to state legislatures to pick up that baton and do the people's business as well as we can. It's very frustrating to have federal preemptions in some of our laws because it exempts us, but we try to work around them. Nevertheless, it is the only path forward I see at this time, with given the national situation that we have, and it's not new. This year, though, the Congress has only passed 14 bills total, and here we are on the 10th month. We passed 400 bills last session. Now, they weren't all good. There were a lot of housekeeping, a lot of technical ones. And there were some good ones. We got safe staffing done for nurses after more than 10 years of working on that. We got the warehouse workers process for safety actually done, even though it was hard because it was an Amazon issue and Amazon didn't like it. We finally got it after many, many years. And
The voluntary quit bill.
we got the voluntary quit bill for unemployment insurance.
Which was huge for women.
So another huge win. So we got some good stuff done.
Redlining.
And I will just say, at the state level, we can do a lot on work lives, on health care. And Pam McEwen is here, who was the very first health exchange executive director. We worked so closely getting that thing done, and it's so good. And Cascade Care was passed by David Frost here, that put on, basically a public option that we never ever had before. So we can do great things in our state legislatures if we're creative and tough about it and can work it out. And it may be that we're going to have a divided nation where states with good legislatures get good stuff done, and sadly, states without good legislatures will just slide back further and further and further. And it could be that's what's going to happen unless some turnaround at the national level, some epiphany occurs at the national level. But that's what I see at this current situation, and I wish I had an easier time of it. But since I'm in a state legislature, I'm going to just say we can do great things.
And do great things and have done them. And then there's the matter of the Supreme Court, and then possibly a Speaker of the House, Donald Trump. And I shouldn't even say that.
Don't even go there. Yeah.
Well, how about now we take some questions from anybody here who might like to ask Karen one.
Go ahead.
Milo.
Can you tell us a little bit about how your experience at the AFL-CIO influenced your work as a state legislator?
Yeah, I worked as a communications director for the state AFL-CIO. And in fact, I was one of the lucky ones who was able to take unpaid leave from my real job and serve in the legislature for about 4 or 5 years. I did that. I couldn't do it past that, but I did it for about 4 or 5 years. It was very helpful. I was very privileged to be able to do that because most people couldn't. I had 3 kids and a family, and I could not have supported our family with a part-time salary. And my husband was a freelancer and had no real income. So at that time, it was pretty stressful, but that also gave me the knowledge to think about the intersection between work and family. And I think that has been something of a mission from the work I've done in the legislature, is to see what we can do to make work lives more productive, safer, healthier, and more secure. And in the same time to help the family become more secure, healthier, and happier. So that's kind of been my lodestar while I've been at the legislature.
I think a lot of people can relate to that. Any other questions?
We can talk a little bit about your work in reproductive rights and abortion and some of the successes that the legislature came up with this session and some past sessions.
Right, because of the Supreme Court and the Dobbs decision, and probably a bad decision on mifepristone coming up at the Supreme Court, given the court we have. We've always, in our state, our voters passed an initiative early, before Roe v. Wade, saying people should have a right to choose and access abortion. And that was done by voters. So and when an initiative passes, it really gives almost a sacred level of law to it. And it's it's very, very strong for we follow it. And it was very encouraging also. So when we've had basic rights, but when the Supreme Court did what it did, you could see the writing on the wall. So we needed to fund and provide funding for our clinics, especially the ones near Idaho and where people were coming in from out of state. And we also did get our own state to purchase mifepristone, which is the abortion drug, because there's real threat to having access to that particular prescription. And this is a very interesting idea. We used the Department of Corrections pharmacy certification to do that purchase, and we were able to get a deep discount on the cost. Instead of $70 a pill, it's $40 a pill. Okay, if we can do that for mifepristone, yeah. I'm just saying. So yes, we've been very active and had a whole group of legislative pieces to fund and protect reproductive rights. I also did carry the constitutional amendment, which is currently in the Senate Rules Committee, and it takes a 2/3 vote in both chambers to pass a constitutional amendment. We don't have a 2/3 majority in either chamber. And so, given the fact that the Republicans will not vote for it, we probably can't get it out of the legislature. If we could get it out of the legislature, it would go to the ballot next year, which would be a tremendous political advantage, I'd say. And it only needs a simple majority to pass and to become part of the Constitution. And it's not only abortion reproductive rights, but it's also birth control, because that will be the next thing the court will go after, in my opinion, is access to full birth control. So hopefully a miracle occurs, but I don't know exactly how.
Thank you.
Any other question? Yes.
I have one statement to say and a question about birth control.
Could you speak a little louder, please?
Oh,
Thank
that
you.
was very loud. So I have one question, and I will say the first question, which is the issue of birth control has many things, many ways to be looked into or analyzed. While also, am I being heard?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear what issue were you talking about?
I'm talking about the birth control.
Birth control. Yes.
Should I stand up? Would that be better?
Sure. That's fine, Amina, that's
Thank you.
yes,
Yeah, but
birth control,
birth
yes.
control is a complex issue for many people in this state, where they're wrong against. There is one thing that we cannot never control: the fact that everybody is an individual is free to do with their life and what they like to do, but the how and at what time is the issue that needs more discussion. Do you discuss at that level of the legislators about the how rather than I'm against or I'm wrong?
I understand what you're saying, yes.
That's one.
Yes,
That's
yes,
one question. My question. But the other comment that I want to say is something that council member Jean asked you, which was, do you have times that you shine, something like that? I think every day of your life is full of shining moments, whether you are against something, or whether you are brought something, or whether you are looking for a solution. You achieve something.
Right.
It's a fulfillment.
Right.
I want you to be proud of that.
Thank you. Thank you. I hear what you said about birth control, and it is a choice and an individual choice for people to decide how and when. And on my shining moment, I would say, I think it was when I was elected Senate President Pro Tem. That was a huge honor. It has to be, you have to win, the entire body has to elect you. It's not just your caucus that gets to choose that. Your whole membership has to. And it really opened my eyes and gave me a broader perspective about how the institution runs and who's doing what. It's so fun to watch it on the floor. It's so interesting to see what's going on and how things do develop and evolve. So it was a great honor. It is a shining moment. And one of the chapters of my book is called, You Can Call Me Madam President.
And of course, you never know. Right now, Patty Murray is second in line to the president.
That's right.
As president pro tem of the Senate, and without there being a speaker of the House.
And I'm third in line with the governor.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, another question, Pam.
Yeah, one of the things I think of Senator Keiser when I think of you is what a good communicator you are. And you trained me in communications back when I was an organizer for Citizen Action. And she kept me from making a lot of terrible mistakes. And she said two rules. She actually gave me a lot of rules, but these are the ones I remember is that it's not a conversation when you're being interviewed, and you're always on the record. And I have remembered those rules and told them to so many people to their immense gratitude. But one of the things I think we struggle with as we're trying to create these things, getting our message out. And I know it's a burden for legislators when they're trying to get things passed. But often I think our messages get garbled. And I don't know if this is something you cover in your book, but it's something you're extraordinarily good at. And I'm wondering if you could give it some thought.
I don't disagree. It makes me crazy. I wish we had a more unified, clear message on fundamentals. We like to talk about policy detail. We like to go into the weeds and explain the facts and give you the statistics. And that does not persuade anyone anymore. Facts don't matter. You have to connect to people on their values and talk to them on their values. And most Democrats don't do that. We are trained on facts and persuasion in debate clubs with our little index cards on our facts that we researched. So it's different, and I will just say this. We're not as disciplined as Republicans, I'll tell you. They hit their list of talking points and they only use those. They never say anything else but what's on that list. And we go all over the place. We're so broad-minded.
Although some of the 8 or 5 or whatever, the far right Republicans in the US House right now don't seem to stay.
Yeah, they're having their problems. Oh dear.
Dave.
Well, maybe in this time, speaking of what you just mentioned, my time in the Senate, we were in the minority for a portion of my time, my 5 years of my 12 that I was there. You've been in the minority, obviously, June, you as well. I'm wondering if you could maybe share with the group kind of the importance of finding a way, not always to agree with the other side, because sometimes the divides are too much, you can't, but there's certain ways to make institutions functional through personal relationships. Both of you were always wonderful, I found, in you would have big disagreements perhaps with your ranking members when you were committee chair, but the tone was always one of respectful disagreement. And it seems like we've totally lost that as a country. And I just, maybe you could kind of share some insights on how you think that's happened. I mean, I have some theories, but I'd be interested in your take.
Yeah. I think the tone we are in right now is horrible, at the national level especially. And I think it's one of the reasons they can't function is because they are unable to talk to each other and listen to each other. And because they're just calling names and positioning themselves and trying to raise money off of those positions. Yeah. They're not trying to make law. They're just trying to make money. At least that's the way I read it. The fact is most state legislatures, even in red states, are not that bad. They are not as crass and argumentative and what is a negative word I don't want to be totally profane about? Disgusting. Okay, so and I see that when as presiding officer, I see that because I see the conversations going on across the aisle between people who have no real common ground, but can still talk to each other and listen to each other. It's when somebody tries to hit all the hot buttons and provoke a debate and provoke anger and upset, and that does happen in the House especially. They go on and on and on. They don't have a 3-minute rule. We have a 3-minute rule sometimes. Anyway, so they just go on for hours into the middle of the night. And I think that does sharpen attitudes instead of having the open mind. But the language of the floor of the Senate, and I should have brought my rule book. There's very particular rules about how to speak and how to address each other and how to make motions and so forth. And all of that protocol seems very stupid and arcane, except it's a method to avoid fisticuffs. It is a method to keep I think the Thomas Jefferson quote was, the saucer to cool the tea. It's a way to cool the rhetoric by using the gentle lady from the 33rd district is mistaken. And that kind of language tones it down. And that's part of the technique and tools that can be used on the floor. But when it all is about outside the chamber, not what you're doing on the floor, I think it gets really out of control.
Sorry about that. I was just gonna comment, I always found it, I tried to remember that even if I was talking to somebody who I thought was totally wrong, didn't get it, and for whatever reason, their amendment was dumb, it didn't make sense. I tried to remember that somebody sent them there.
Right.
And they were representing a point of
That's
view
right.
that, you have to kind of legitimize their
Right.
perspective, even if you disagree with it, even
Right.
if you can't find a common ground. You know, it's nice if you can, but sometimes you can't. And I think we've lost that we just don't even hear each other anymore.
It does seem at the national level, but I don't think that's been
Yeah.
lost at the state level.
Yeah.
And we do have the other institutional thing we have is the cafeteria,
Mhm.
which is a cafeteria where lobbyists can't be, only members or their family. And so we actually sometimes talk to each other, break bread and eat together, and sometimes talk about things that aren't policy or politics. And it does build a relationship, and it helps when you've got some other issue. So having a real relationship, I even had a relationship with Doug Erickson.
Yeah, me too.
So he was a tough one.
So many times when my husband and I have CNN or MSNBC on, with Congress,
Yeah.
and I'm going, that would never be allowed in our state.
That's
Senate.
right.
We would be gavelled down, and I don't remember the term, but you cannot disparage.
That's right.
Whatever
Absolutely.
it is.
Yeah, I object.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so valuable because we
Yeah.
did have relationships and we did have to talk to people, and we couldn't just get up there and slam people, which
Right.
they do in Congress all the time. Yes.
Well, a couple things that you brought to mind. One of the time when the Ukraine war broke out, well, that wasn't the Ukraine war. when they were attacked, and so many, and then there was resolutions in maybe both the Senate and the House at the state level, and then and then we got to hear from all these different people who had Ukrainian connections, and it was so personal and it was so meaningful, and it suddenly nothing else mattered, and I think that was really helpful to the rest, their leaders, and that was really helpful for us to hear and to come together on one issue. And if that could happen more often for some other reasons, not under a crisis, but to hear so that the rest of us in the state can hear that everyone there is a person. And some you may like and some you don't, but they're still people. And you will have a connection at the people. Anyway, that was really meaningful. But my question was, what do you see ahead for yourself and for the Senate?
I have an agenda. I always have an agenda.
Yes. But I'm thinking of the coming year. I mean, really short term.
I am. I'm working right now on bills for next session. So that's what I do. But I'm also thinking about writing another book. So
Okay.
that's another sort of back of the brain thing that's going on. And because I enjoy writing, I enjoy researching. I was originally trained as a reporter, as a journalist, and that's kind of going home again for me.
Yeah.
So I like that.
Can you tell us the topic?
Not yet.
Okay.
I'm still thinking on it.
Maybe a year or two from now we'll be back
Well,
here.
this book took 3 years, and the reason is I wrote the first draft during the pandemic when I had time, and then we had a legislative session. It was a virtual session we had to prepare for and do. And so then I did the third draft. I did the second draft, then I did the third draft. Then I had to run for re-election. And then I did the fourth draft and sent it off to the publisher. And they said, I had to go to session again. And I did the final proofs during special session this spring. And finally it's out. So now I'm gonna ask you all to buy a copy and I'll be happy to sign it. And, unless you have another question, yes.
Right there, and she'll have to.
One last quick question, I know we're running out of time.
I'm sorry.
Just one quick question, so I know we're running out of time, but, so we're at the university bookstore, it's in, like, serves the university, and, there are a lot of young people here in this area, and, historically, young people haven't been the most politically active, but I think that might be changing a little bit. Is there some advice that you would give to young people, specifically, like in Seattle or in Washington, of how is the best way for them to become involved? If they're too young to run, but what are good ways for students maybe to get involved? What are good ways to show support or for bills in such a way that like legislators would pay attention?
Right. First of all, we all, both the houses have interns that come down and work, and they get paid. We don't have unpaid interns in the legislature, not paid a lot, but paid. And so individuals who really have an interest in the legislature can put their application into the intern program and get assigned to a member's office and work in that office for that session and see up close and personal what's going on. And that,
I'm sorry to interrupt, but they also get college credit here.
yeah, that's right. So it's really a worthwhile thing for people to do. And so there's that. Even younger, we have a PAGE program for young under 16-year-olds. And then we also have, in the Senate, we hire session aides. So it's a higher pay and more responsibility, but a temporary job just for the session. So you can do that, and that takes, really, you're the incoming person. So it takes a lot of patience and a lot of flexibility, but you see it up close and personal and really get involved. I had the best session aide this year. Oh my gosh. He is now working for Kim Schreier, and he was just, I don't know if you remember Trayvon.
I do.
Yeah, he's now
Very
working. Yeah, he's fantastic. Anyway, so those are two ways. Or just volunteer on a campaign and get to know one of your state legislators and talk to them. Get to know them.
Or work part-time for money on campaigns too.
Hey, John.
Well, I really have to say something because, first of all, you can run for office when you're 18.
Yeah, you can run for office.
So what Senator Frock said regarding sort of the culture of actually bipartisanship, it's the people who make the culture work are the senators and representatives. And Karen has been one of the best people in terms of both holding on to it and advancing her progressive policies and bringing along members of the opposite caucus. So you did that in 2007 with, I think it was very slim margin we had for paid family medical leave, and it was, and you got Honeycutt, I think, who was a very conservative senator from Central Washington. Was it Honeycutt? I think it was.
No, it was Bob.
It was
Bob from Gig Harbor.
Oh, Bob Oak.
Bob Oak.
Yeah. But more than that, in 2017, Karen, the Democrats were in the minority, and Karen was able to work with Senator Joe Fain, and not only get Joe Fain to take the lead on this, so Karen was sort of in the back, but actually pushing things along, but getting a majority of the Senate Republican caucus to vote for paid family medical leave. And that was instrumental. It could not have happened without that work. And if you think about systemic progressive change, you have to look at paid family medical leave as probably one of the most important advances in our state for people. And that's thanks to Senator Keiser.
And you too, John.
I would like to make sure you know that books are available for purchase. Milo's is back here and we'll help you with that. And we're going to have Karen here for a little longer so that she can sign.
And I have my blue felt pen.
Yes. And I want to thank you all for coming. It's been delightful. I wish we had more time, but the bookstore is closed. And Milo would like to get things wrapped up. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you so much.
Enjoy the book.
You want me
Okay.
to sign it for you and Edwin?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Great.
Oh, that's right.
She's running for